What's up, everyone? Welcome into Foxboro Rush. I'm George Bleccia. He's Travis Thomas. T, how we doing today, my man?
I'm doing good. You know I love that theme song, man. It gets me fired up every time, bro. I just wish I had long hair so I could just rock.
A nice... You look like you need help whenever you do that, respectfully, my man. Yeah. Hey, we got a great episode for you guys. Now, you know, we're giving everyone the days off during the holiday season.
Yes.
But we had plenty of great combos over this last year, especially giving out our Mount Rushmores. So this would be a special Mount Rushmore episode. Now, we know 2025 is just on the horizon.
Can't wait.
Just about to arrive.
Can't wait, George.
T, before we turn the calendar, rip them up and flip it to the new year 2025. What's something you're taking with you from 2024?
Oh, God, I hope nothing. I hope I leave it all. No, it was a challenging year for me this year, George, and that's why I'm looking forward to 2025. But I tell you one thing, man, I've always prided myself on being tough. Like, I raised my kids tough. My parents raised me tough. And I think that's always meant physically to me. Like, no days off, no sick days. If my limbs aren't hanging off, I'm going to work. And now, 2024 has taught me true, like, mental toughness. And I didn't even realize how mentally tough I was until this year. So that's one thing I'll take from 2024 that's a positive. It's like, okay, not only am I physically tough, John Wayne style, but I'm also mentally tough as well. So I'm taking that into 2025. But I would love a year, just 1 year of my life, where I don't need to be either one. I mean, George, I would love to not have to be physically or mentally tough in 2025. Can I get that? Can I get a lazy river year? Can I just get just floating on
no
down?
Battling upstream, no currents.
Oh, yeah. That's all I need, George. That's all I need.
I like it. I mean, you take the resiliency with you. And part of your resiliency, I would say, T, is you always came in with a smile, man.
Thank you, bro.
We talk about a lot of stuff in life, but always smiling. So that there's different types of toughness. You know,
That's
you
right.
don't got to come in, what is it, a rain cloud over your day, kind of.
Yep.
You deal with your stuff, but you still come with that big smile, and you know what? Probably good for you. I think. Let me think. What one thing from 2024 to take into 2025?
You had a great year, dog. You had a great year.
Stressful, yeah.
Nah, but you got a lot of wins this year too, George.
I know. I'm taking in with me now, fiance, which is exciting.
Yeah.
This episode's coming out right after that all went down.
Your career, you got a lot popping right now,
Appreciate
baby.
you.
I'm proud of you, George. I'm not saying it was easy.
You know what I'm saying?
I'm not saying it was easy.
It's a reflection of being very lucky for the challenges I've faced. Now, everyone, you can take challenges in a different way.
Sure.
These were welcomed challenges by me. These were tough things, a lot of growing up things. Now doing at 30 where, you can't even conceptualize like proposing or saving up for a ring and all that, and did it.
Yep.
I'm happy I did it.
Yep.
Love the ring. Love the gal. So I'm just happy. I'll take that with me, that positivity into 2025.
Absolutely.
Count the blessings, have the perspective every day. You feel me?
Absolutely. I feel you, man. I'm proud of you, man. Keep grinding, bro.
Appreciate you. Now, this will be a special episode
of
a Mount Rushmore. So stuff that's happened in the past. But what I loved about these tiers, like these Mount Rushmores, they stand the test of time for the most part. When you're making like a running back Mount Rushmore, you know you're going to have who you're going to have on that. It's going to be a Barry Sanders. And you and I were head to head when it came to an Emmitt Smith or when it would come to some of the best, wide receivers in the game. Everyone knows there's going to be a Jerry Rice on that.
That's right.
There's going to be a Randy Moss, but it's like who else is out there? So that's what I like about these Mount Rushmores, man. Everyone has their differing opinions. These were voted on the people that work with us at Ness, and that's what made these fun to put together.
Yeah, I think that's well said. What it did for me, too, especially since we're reflecting on the year that was and looking ahead to the year that's coming, when we started doing Mount Rushmores, I didn't even realize how many of these players got me into football, period. Like Jerry Rice, growing up at the time I did, I mean, the 49ers were everything. Him in Montana, him and Steve Young. And Jerry Rice was my favorite player. I was a 49er fan growing up because of them winning the Super Bowls. And it's just like, man, like I didn't really realize until talking it out with you, brother, how much a lot of these players literally meant to my life. Jerry Rice being one of them.
Hey, for me, it was LaDainian Tomlinson. Man. The insane clip he was scoring at. Scored, like, I believe it was 17 straight games over the course of 2 separate seasons. And, that's when real football was played, where the defense, not everything was catered to the offense. And that 17 consecutive scoring was separate from him breaking the single-season touchdown record for a running back, too. So that's what I like. You reflect on the players. And then there are the guys that would stand the test of time. Like, I've never seen Barry Sanders play a football game live. Right. But I've witnessed the greatness of Barry Sanders. Like, watching documentaries on him, watching the highlights. highlights also.
Yep.
And a guy like what he did for Saquon Barkley, signed a jersey for him and sent it to him and said, hey, shout out to you showing people the value that you bring. Good on you betting on yourself, basically. Upstanding guy.
I tell you what, though, George, going back to LT, he had the best touchdown celebration. Remember, just flip them. Oh, man, the best. LT was a special, special player. All these Mount Rushmore players, that's what's so fun about doing this kind of stuff. Yeah. You reflect on the greatness that was. Even though we, on this show, acknowledge the greatness that is in this league, it is fun to look back to.
For sure. So here's our episode of Foxboro Rush Best Stuff from our Mount Rushmores. And, hey, when you're done with this episode, please make sure to like, subscribe, download, rate, review, wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Amazon Prime, and YouTube. And if you're watching on Nesson's YouTube page, hit the subscribe button as well. You'll get notifications for when there's fresh drops on all new content coming out of Nesson. But here is our best stuff from our conversations of our Mount Rushmores.
Yep.
All right, so let's get into Mount Rushmore talk. So we sent out a ballot to our Nesson.com writers, on-air talent, our producers, all throughout Nesson, basically the people we know that know ball. And we ranked every position, quarterback, receiver, offensive lineman, kickers, Mount Rushmore, even kick returners. Let's start with the quarterbacks today.
All right.
So the unanimous top 4, the most listed were, no surprise, Tom Brady 1.
Yep.
Joe Montana 2.
Oh.
Peyton Manning on the Mount Rushmore. And to round it out, Patrick Mahomes.
All right.
So Brady, GOAT, greatest football player of all time, no doubt. Joe Montana, the GOAT before the GOAT. Between the two of them, obviously combined 12 rings. Peyton Manning, stuck in the Tom Brady era, would have had more rings. Mahomes, to me, will be the GOAT one day. I'm just thinking, the guys that got left off. Could have been a Drew Brees.
Yeah, Brees.
Dan Marino doesn't have the rings. Johnny Unitas.
Elway, we just talked about. He's got 2 rings.
Finally broke through at the end and got his rings.
Yep.
Johnny Unitas is a name that always comes up, and I'm like, let me see. Played from 55 to 73. Long career. Only won 1 Super Bowl. But in his career, 290 touchdowns, 253 interceptions. Mahomes, 63 interceptions. Manning, 251. Montana, 139. Brady, 212. And obviously Unitas played in that era where there's a lot less passes thrown. But looking at this Mount Rushmore, Trav, you love it? You hate it? What do you think?
I was shocked to see Montana over Manning. I felt like most people had elevated Peyton Manning over him at this point. But as far as the 4, no, I'm not shocked at all. You mentioned the guys, Elway, Marino. Marino didn't have the rings. Unitas I didn't even necessarily think about, but I always think in terms of players that I watch, so I wouldn't have thought of him with respect. I don't have a problem with this at all. I think Mahomes is clearly the one on this list whose stock is rising by the sheer strength that he's the only one currently playing out of this list. But no, the 4's right. I'm trying to pick my brain of what current quarterbacks can maybe crack this one day. And the only one I can sort of think of is Joe Burrow, but he needs, at this point, a decade of being healthy and then letting it play out. And I'm just not sure he can give us that. It's not Lamar. Maybe if C.J. Stroud, what he did in his rookie year is sustainable, but we have no idea of knowing that.
He continues to climb from there.
I know you're a big Jordan Love fan. Let's see also if it's sustainable. But there's no real guys right now that I look at that I think can crack this. Obviously, you need, what are the prerequisites? We understand the statistics. So in a passing league, I think there's going to be plenty of guys in the conversation to be on a Mount Rushmore one day, statistically only. But, let's be honest. You got to have the rings, baby. It don't mean a ting if you ain't got that ring. So you need more than 1 ring, which is why, even like you mentioned, Drew Brees, he's got 1 ring. I think it hurts him. Aaron Rodgers, he's got 1 ring. I think it hurts him.
He get a second this year. No, I'm joking.
We'll see, right? So you got to have playoff memories, playoff moments, big playoff wins, and you got to have rings. Outside of Mahomes right now, who in the hell do you really trust to get that done?
The one I think of, I like the Burrow call. He's just 27.
Yeah.
They finally got an offensive line for him.
Well,
my issue is that's the Cincinnati Bengals, and that's just a loser franchise. Now, he's been to a Super Bowl.
Yes.
But that's a loser franchise.
Yes.
Jordan Love, I like you shouting out. No one's higher on him than me. But to say that he can enter a GOAT convo, I need to see 17 games, let alone multiple years.
That's what I said.
And then you have C.J. Stroud.
Yeah.
I like that call, too. When Bobby Slowick gets a head coaching job, though, it's going to be very interesting what happens with C.J. Stroud and his progression. Justin Herbert, just 26 years old, has all the ability in the world. Let's see him in a winning culture, like with Jim Harbaugh and what he's going to build in L.A.
Yep.
I'm more willing, out of those guys, I would put my stock into Justin Herbert or Josh Allen entering this greatest of all time combo.
Josh Allen.
But the issue with both those guys I named, both are in the AFC. C.J. Stroud, AFC. Joe Burrow, AFC.
Yeah.
Jordan Love's in the NFC. Who's that guy that's in the AFC? Mahomes. The only one. All these names we go through. You mentioned Elway. I said Drew Brees. I said Marino. You mentioned other guys on this list. Mahomes is the only current player that we have no problem of going, what?
Yeah.
When mentioning his name with the greats of the game.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell you what, there's a kid in Chicago keep your eye on. He hasn't even
He's in the Hall of Fame already for you, bro.
He hasn't even taken a snap yet, but that's a kid that is skill set wise very similar to Patrick Mahomes. He can move around. He doesn't take big shots. The arm's there. The weapons are there. It's a historic franchise, not a historically great quarterback franchise, but a historically great franchise. I think that plays into it in a big market as well. All of a sudden, Caleb Williams makes the playoffs as a rookie and has a good showing, like C.J. Stroud did. Now you're maybe cooking with something there. So that's someone to just keep your eye on. My only concern with Caleb long term, what I've noticed with him now, this didn't happen when I covered him in high school, but I didn't cover him. I didn't cover Hollywood Caleb Williams at USC either. So it seems like he's a little into me now. It's some diva stuff there. So that worries me a bit because things like that can affect your legacy, right? Patrick Mahomes, one of the reasons, yes, he's a great player, but he's also a great teammate. He's also just very much an all-shucks country boy. We love that. That's endearing. Caleb has some things that developed since he left the DMV where I'm looking and I'm like, I don't know if that's really you or a facade, but that can hurt a legacy. All of a sudden you get in year 4, year 5 with him and he's on some diva stuff that can change the public perception and change a legacy.
Situation again, 2 great tackles, 3 great receivers. We can see what they do with that defense. Got him a good play caller in Shane Waldron. It's up to Matt Eberflus and what he can do with Caleb Williams. What you would like to hear, there was a report coming out of the camp. Caleb Williams actually had to talk with his teammates. They were leaving too many bottles and too many tape cut off. Empty water bottles around the locker room of hey, let's be adults, clean up after yourselves because it's not your job to do that.
That's a good thing.
That's a DMV boy right there, right? That's a DMV Caleb coming through.
Damn right.
That's the stuff you want to hear. You put the country accent on it.
Hey, look, meanwhile, I'm like this, George. Litter everywhere. Do it.
You guys know we have our Nesson Mount Rushmores of NFL players. Nesson.com writers, on-air talent producers, all were given basically ballots to submit.
Yep.
And here were the top 4 running backs on Mount Rushmore. They got the most votes.
All right.
Barry Sanders, Jim Brown, Walter Payton, LaDainian Tomlinson.
All right.
What do you think of this 4? I say Adrian Peterson needs to be on that.
Okay.
And this sounds crazy. I'm going to boo off Jim Brown.
Yeah, it does sound crazy. And that's where I'm going here. I don't have a problem with this Mount Rushmore at all. I feel like obviously people voted on this. This is a consensus thing. This is a majority rule thing. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with an Adrian Peterson write-in vote. I'm personally a Marshall Faulk write-in vote guy.
Great dual threat back.
Yeah, but Walter Payton and Jim Brown both, I didn't see. And I respect this. I think Earl Campbell deserves some love. If you're going to go old school, a ton of guys old school deserve some love here. But I just always, this is personal, when I do Mount Rushmores, and you know this about me, George, I only go off people that I watched because I can speak to that. So I don't hate your Adrian Peterson. I'm a Marshall Faulk guy, but I can't. At the same time of saying I only personally put people that I watch, I cannot sit here on Foxboro Rush and say, damn, Jim Brown or Walter Payton don't deserve to be on this list. Of course they do. Of course they do.
That's what makes these great to me, though. My 4, my ballot was Barry Sanders, Walter Payton, LaDainian Tomlinson, Adrian Peterson. Walter Payton was the standard of the position.
Yeah.
Barry Sanders, by many, is seen as the greatest ever. And he did the most with the least in Detroit. Carrying that team. Bad offensive line, awful franchise all around. It was just untackleable. That's what you want in a running back.
Yeah.
Can you make guys miss? That's what he did better than anyone.
Sure.
LT, the scoring he did at the clip he did. At one point, he scored in 17 straight games.
Undeniable.
And then also, he set the single-season record for rushing touchdowns in a season.
Yeah.
And those two did not overlap. Can you imagine scoring in 17 straight games and then also going out and scoring 31 total touchdowns, 28 rushing in just 16 games?
Sure.
That's what he did. He could also throw for touchdowns. And I went Adrian Peterson because that man, whatever he did, carried that offense for that stretch.
Literally.
He was the best player in the NFL at certain points.
Yeah.
And he was in a more modern NFL. It was a run-heavy NFL. When defenses were built to stop the run, I give the nod to Adrian Peterson over Jim Brown, and I'm giving the nod to the modern era. That's my take.
I'm fine with that. Again, like, that's your list. Mine would be Barry, Emmett Smith, Marshall Faulk, and LT. But that's just off of the guys that I watched. And then I would have Adrian Peterson right outside that. But that, again, I cannot, just going off what Nesson.com, writers, on-air talent like us and producers did, all people we work with and respect every day that know ball, I cannot for the life of me take a damn Jim Brown or a Walter Payton off of the list. I'm fine with the list, but mine personally would be Barry, Emmett, Marshall Faulk, and LT, and it sounds like yours is very similar except with Adrian Peterson. I respect that.
Hey, we're both 3/4 of the way there with what our Mount Rushmores are and what it reflects there. All right, let's talk receivers now. We got our Nesson wide receiver Mount Rushmore. Again, guys, we pulled our Nesson.com writers, on-air talent, producers, anyone that knows ball in the office. They submitted their ballots. And the top 4 receivers, our wide receiver Mount Rushmore in Nesson. I'm going 4-1 here.
Okay.
Terrell Owens.
All right.
Calvin Johnson.
All right.
Randy Moss.
Yep.
And Jerry Rice.
No problems. Zero.
Jerry Rice, before Tom Brady, was arguably the greatest football of all time. Like, it was Lawrence Taylor, Jerry Rice.
You still could argue that.
And you still could. Amazing hands, great route runner.
Yep. Tough.
Pristine conditioning. Ran the same in the first quarter as he did in the fourth.
Yep.
Great after the catch. Leading receiver in NFL history by 5,000 yards.
Yeah, man.
Then Randy Moss, man, so much more athletic than Rice.
Yep.
Deep ball receiver, was uncoverable in his peak, but there's those lost years in Oakland.
Yep.
And there's that quick fizzle out once he left New England, where at his peak, you could say he was the greatest receiver of all time, but it's the length. Like, Jerry Rice put it together for so many seasons.
Right.
With 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, but was as consistent as could be. Tough to argue that. Calvin Johnson, Amiti, greatest wide receiver I've ever seen play football.
Wow.
So dominant.
Yeah.
I don't argue it. Okay. So those 3 are my top. That 4 spot, though, I actually went Marvin Harrison at that 4 spot.
Over T.O.
Yes. Reception machine, 5th all-time in receptions. Then I'm looking at numbers, though, and if Julio Jones had a Lombardi trophy, he had a Super Bowl ring, I wouldn't hate him being top 4. The one for me, Larry Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
2nd in receiving yards all time, 2nd in receptions, played 17 seasons, all with the Cardinals, and had some of the worst quarterbacks in the world throwing him the football, and he still put up Hall of Fame numbers. So actually, when I revisit all this, I would boot out Terrell Owens. I would put Larry Fitzgerald in that 4 spot.
I think you're allowing the antics of T.O.
No,
to
it's not
skew
the
your
antics.
decision.
To me, it's the overall numbers and who Larry Fitzgerald played with.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't care about the antics.
Listen, bro, there's no way I'm taking T.O. off of this list. T.O., you could almost argue T.O.'s too low, being 4 on here. He was a pain in the arse, but he was so dynamic. I mean, he had everything. Routes, hands, size, speed, toughness. He had everything. He was just a pain in the arse. I hear you on Marvin Harrison. I think a lot of that was Manning, obviously, and also I watched Marvin Harrison get hit into oblivion. There were games when and the Patriots had the blueprint. I mean, the Patriots are one of the teams that did it. But there were games when you could take those Colts receivers out of the game, quite literally. Like, you just hit them, and they are obsolete. All of them. I don't care who you name. Reggie White, Dallas Clark. It didn't matter. You hit them, and that was the end of them. Now, you can't do that in today's football. I understand that. But I just watched that happen to Marvin Harrison too many times for me to put him on this list. Look, I agree with you, Larry Fitzgerald. I have him on the outside looking in, but you can make a case. Chris Carter, who I brought up earlier, you can make a case. And there's actually a young man right now we got to get more from for longer. But I think, well, really, Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson could make a case to be on this list. But Justin Jefferson looks like he was made in a lab. He's very similar to Megatron and Randy Moss on this list. I think you got to keep your eyes on them. But personally, George, I legit don't have a problem with this list at all. I think they got it right.
I can't get angry over T.O. getting in there. I'll put Calvin Johnson physically was a specimen and
ridiculous.
One of one.
Ridiculous.
So I don't think anyone, at his size, literally the size of a defensive end, maybe bigger,
right?
And double teamed, no problem. You throw the ball up to him, he's coming down with it every time.
That's
and I just think that is such a unique talent for a receiver to have. Justin Jefferson does have that, where you just got to put it in the vicinity and he's most likely going to catch it.
Right.
But his high point ability, his deep ball ability in the red zone, Calvin Johnson was so dominant. Coming out of a triple option offense in Georgia Tech, didn't put up good numbers his rookie season, then it exploded that point on. If it wasn't for his health, I think it was his ankles that really just had him bow out early when he was still at his peak. This guy could still be playing right now, still putting up insane numbers. So the ballots have been casted. They came back. And here are the four. To me, it's honestly no surprise.
Yeah.
Antonio Gates, Tony Gonzalez, Travis Kelce, Rob Gronkowski.
Yeah.
Anyone you'd push off? Anyone you would include?
No problems. I mean, you and I always talk about honorable mentions. The only guy I can think that I watched who's not on this list that was really special was Shannon Sharp.
That's what I was thinking too. I mean, 3 Super Bowls.
He was just unbelievable. Yeah. He was really ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
12 yards of reception before that was the game.
Yeah, and not just that. You're right about that, but also he could block. He was tough. He was a leader. Shannon Sharp had everything. And for most of my life, I felt like he was the greatest tight end I watched. I thought Jimmy Graham was extremely prolific.
Very athletic.
With Drew Brees and all that. But I always felt
did
like...
Did not block.
He didn't block, A. And B, I always felt like that was a little bit of a systemic thing with Breeze, with Peyton, with some of the weapons those teams had. Not that Graham wasn't special, but I always sort of felt like there was a little bit of system there. I felt the same way about Antonio Gates, too, to be honest, for a long time. But his numbers were just so ridiculous that at some point you can't deny him. So I'm fine with him being on the list. Kelce and Gronk are obvious. Tony Gonzalez is really – I think he was rated properly at the time he was playing, but since his playing days have been over, much like Shannon Sharp, I think sometimes being in the media and being a big personality might work against your playing career because now people just see you as a loudmouth that does what we do, George, and they almost forget how great Tony Gonzalez was. Fantastic. In fact, Shannon Sharp, for most of my life, I felt like it was the greatest I watched until Tony Gonzalez came along. And then I said, oh, my God, that's a guy. And now I feel like it's Gronk.
For me, that was Antonio Gates. It was Tony Gonzalez. It was Antonio Gates, Tony Gonzalez. And Gronk came along. That's the greatest tight end of all time, no doubt about it. Blocking, receiving.
Everything.
And he played so physical. He had so many injuries. But the injuries that he played through, his knee, his elbow, his shoulder, his back.
GOAT. He's the GOAT.
You saw how much those injuries tore him apart when he first retired.
That's right.
Like football wasn't fun for him. Then he found CBD. He found marijuana. That helped rejuvenate his career, and he's able to come back from Tampa. Kelce is the greatest receiving tight end of all time. Not all around, but you can't deny his route running ability, his reliability. And yes, he's paired off with the greatest quarterback of all time, talent-wise, one day in Patrick Mahomes.
Yes.
But even when he was with Alex Smith, before Mahomes came along and became what he became, this guy still was one of the best tight ends in the league. The 3 rings, the all-pros, his receiving numbers are insane. The one I go to, I like you mentioned Shannon Sharp. 3 Super Bowls, 10,000 career yards plus, 62 touchdowns. Before it was his time. That's a tight end that you drop him in now.
He could play now.
He would be the best in the league, maybe. And maybe he'd be a wide receiver. He'd be a Kyle Pitts, but actually working out because I think he's that good, that athletic.
Right.
The one, it would be ugly. I don't think you put him on the Mount Rushmore.
Who?
But tight ends are security blankets. Tight ends are reliable. They're chain movers. They got to block. They got to get open. They got to be secure, right?
Yeah.
Jason Witten for 15 seasons did that.
Yeah.
13,000 career yards receiving. 10-plus yards per reception.
Ridiculous.
A chain mover.
Yeah, he was.
74 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Wasn't the best, wasn't the fastest, wasn't the sexiest. No.
He could block, too.
Yes, and he got the job done.
Yep.
But I can't dispute this Mount Rushmore. Maybe I'd put Sharp in over Antonio Gates, but that's still so tough because Gates is a legend.
The numbers,
man. But Sharp has the rings.
I know. But
2 with the Broncos, 1 with the Ravens. You can't deny that.
You can't deny it.
But a tight end situation is beyond of rings.
Yeah,
it's like offensive lineman.
And Antonio Gates was a bad MFer, man. He was just, so good. At some point, it's just like there's a little bit of eyeball test too. Not to say that Shannon Sharp wasn't fantastic, but when you watch Antonio Gates at his prime and you watch Shannon Sharp at his prime, boy, I think I take Antonio Gates, and this is coming from a Shannon Sharp fan. I tell you what, Jason Witten's a great point. Jay Novacek before him too. With Dallas was very tough. He played with all the Aikman. Played with the Aikman teams.
Okay.
He was fantastic. Dallas always has had good tight ends. But yeah, I think Sharp. I think you and I agree. Even over Witten. Sharp's the one guy on the outside looking in here that probably deserves Mount Rushmore. I just don't know who you take off. I don't think I'm taking Antonio Gates off. Right
Mount Rushmores are like eye tests too. I mean, end of the day, we're playing football, and who's the best? That's what I'm saying. And I think eye test where it's undeniable is Tony Gonzalez.
Oh yeah,
the one rip I give him.
Who? Gonzalez?
He left Kansas City. Yeah, like I'm gonna go into the Hall of Fame as a Falcon. He really disrespected KC and the Chiefs, who loved him. He did that. Kind of like a dead man to them from that point on.
Yeah. I guess his most prolific years were with. I don't know why he would choose. Yeah, you're right. He should have went in as a Chief. That's weird.
Got to the Super Bowl with the Falcons. His most prolific years with Matt Ryan, that quarterback. Putting up much bigger numbers. But he was so consistent from like '98. I think he played up until
he was special, man.
20, like maybe 14. I could be extending.
Sounds
it. 2013. Right. I was 1 year off.
Yeah, that sounds right.
He came into the league in '97 and played till 2013. That long, that good, at that high of a level.
No doubt.
Hey, we got the Nesson Mount Rushmore of offensive linemen. I love this, man. I tried
to get that right over the plate on you, George.
I'm just going to become numb. I'm just going to ignore it. You're annoying me so much. I'm saying ignore and annoy. I'm not getting annoyed by it. I'm getting annoyed by you, but I'm going to ignore you.
Before the show, George called me a grown man child. That's a true story.
I called you a child. The grown man part, you're adding to it. That's how it goes. All right, Nesson Mount Rushmore, offensive lineman. We pulled Nesson.com writers, our producers, our on-air talent. Everyone submitted ballots. The 4 offensive linemen, it's tough to hate this. Anthony Munoz, number 1.
Okay.
John Hanna, New England Patriot legend, number 2. Right. Jonathan Ogden, 3. And Joe Thomas, 4. What do you think of this?
Well, I'm shocked, first of all, that you came to me first because, I don't give a damn. I mean, congratulations to the Mount Rushmore of the offensive linemen. Can you protect Tom Brady, who's the GOAT in terms of the Mount Rushmore behind you? Okay, great. Then I'm cool. That's how I look at offensive linemen. Can you block for me? You can.
All these guys can.
Come on down. Every single one of them. I had the pleasure to cover one of them in Jonathan Ogden, and it was great because, I still clearly don't have a ton of admiration for offensive linemen, but I respect them. I understand their value, and that was not a normal human being. He was large. That was a big man, or is a big man. And I remember interviewing him for my first time. I'm not the smallest cat you've ever seen. 6'3", 215, pure
steel muscle.
Pure steel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean like pure. Antimanium, like pure. So I walk up to this guy, and I am extending my arm. Like it is full-blown, like offensive rebound style, holding the microphone to try to get near his face. And I'm pretty sure I didn't. I'm pretty sure it was uncomfortable for the both of us. But I got the interview. He was soft-spoken. He was cool. And then I watched him dominate forever. Yep. So, I at least feel like privileged that someone on the Mount Rushmore, according to the people at Nesson that know ball, I got a chance to cover.
Wasn't Jonathan Ogden, famously frugal? And when I say frugal, I got my boys that are cheap. He was just famously, really smart with his money. He never spent.
Yeah, he's a really humble, quiet dude, unassuming. he not only was frugal, but just like across the board, just not a lot of. We didn't even interview him that much because he wasn't a great soundbite. Kind of wet blankety.
It's probably how he liked to keep it. He's like, I'll talk to the media. I'm gonna show up and be a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, he was nasty though. I mean, out on the field, you could see the difference. Like there was a lot of great offensive linemen in that time that came through Baltimore, but no one touched him.
I mean, he was the best offensive lineman for a 2,000-yard rusher and Jamal Lewis.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's just a small part of how good he was. I'm surprised Orlando Pace wasn't on this list because to me it's always been Anthony Munoz, Jonathan Ogden, Orlando Pace. Those are the top 3 tackles. Joe Thomas was so solid for so long. And if he was in a great situation, like an Orlando Pace or a Jonathan Ogden, then he would be spoken much more highly of.
Yeah, sure.
Right? But he was with the loser Cleveland Browns. He's been through hell, of all their terrible seasons, but always showed up, was always a blocker, never penalized, and was just so rock solid. And for a long, long, long time was the best left tackle in football.
Yeah.
So I think Thomas is right. John Hanna, I mean, he's the greatest guard of all time. Now, obviously, if we're at the New England Sports Network, this name will come up more than across, but
sure.
He played for bad Patriots teams, but at his athleticism, a great pass blocker, not just in a run blocker in a run-heavy game, but how athletic he was, how tough. And as a guard pulling on both sides of the line of scrimmage was just so solid for those teams. He was an elite on a power sweep, very athletic, very strong. And again, one of arguably the greatest interior offensive linemen of all time. Makes sense for him to make this list. And I would like to see Walter Jones, a left tackle for the Seattle Seahawks.
Walter Jones was sick.
I'll never forget this. 5,073 career pass attempts. Called for holding just 9 times.
Crazy.
Beaten for a sack 23 times in his career. 23
That's crazy,
times.
bro.
The best left tackles right now are getting beat for a sack like 5-6 times in a season. 23 times in his career.
That's well said. Walter Jones, Orlando Pace is a good one. Will Shields is another one. I mean, there's so many great offensive linemen, but I think we've gone through this before where you're a little more passionate than I am on, how is this person not on the list? Let's move this old timer, which is what you do, off of this list and put this guy from the modern era on. But for the most part, with these Mount Rushmores I've noticed, I don't really have a problem with it, but I certainly always have an honorable mention list that we're talking about now. Will Shields is another guy that
Walter Jones, Orlando,
and Walter Jones and Pace are all guys that could be on this list. But at the same time, I mean, as a kid, I remember Anthony Munoz with the Bengals, and not even as a child giving a damn about the offensive line. But I knew who he was because he was so prolific. So I understand that. Hannah, you talked about. Ogden, I covered. Thomas, I think with Thomas, the longevity, too, really plays a part of it. I mean, it was absolutely Drek. What's worse than Drek? That's what there was in Cleveland, except for Joe Thomas forever.
I'm seeing if I'm pulling up his reference page.
Who? Joe Thomas?
Joe Thomas.
He played a long time on a lot of horrible teams, but he was consistently great.
He was in the league 2007 to 2017.
Yeah.
From 2007 to 2016, never missed a single game. Started all 16 games in the season.
Dominant.
100% of the snaps from 2012 to 2016, 94% of their snaps in the games he played in 2017. I think he went down with an injury.
Here's a stat. Listen to this.
Here we go.
Almost 7,000 pass blocking attempts. Joe Thomas only allowed 30 sacks during his career.
Awesome. That's nuts. All right, now let's do the quick math.
I mean, bruh. Almost 7,000. I'll give you the exact number. 6,680. That's how many pass blocking attempts in his career. He only gave up 30.
Yeah, and you put those numbers together. He was allowing a sack 0.004% of every dropback. Nuts.
The only offensive lineman in NFL history to be voted to 10 consecutive Pro Bowls.
Yep.
I mean, listen, bro, this is Cleveland at their worst.
6-time All-Pros. And he showed up and worked every day for them.
Yeah.
Could have held out. Could have pulled the Brandon Ayuk.
Right.
Showed up to Cleveland every day.
Know why? I mean, hard hat, lunch
it's offensive linemen.
Yeah.
Same thing you get with Jonathan Ogden.
Facts. They're always the coolest, by the way. You've covered this stuff a long time. Offensive linemen are the coolest
Realest dudes.
I like linebackers for some reason. I think they're just a little kooky, and I kind of
like you.
Yeah, I think so. I was never big enough to play linebacker, but I always like their kind of mentality. I think and persona. They're tough. They're nice, but also with an edge. Don't mess with them. I always like linebacker.
We've spoken about the offensive side of the ball plenty. Now we're getting to the defensive side. Linebacker, Mount Rushmore. We asked NESN.com writers, on-air talent producers to vote on the 4 greatest linebackers of all time. The list that we came up with, I think it's no surprise these 4, honestly. Yeah. Lawrence Taylor, Ray Lewis, Dick Butkus, and Derek Thomas. 2 great sack artists and 2 great off-ball linebackers. Butkus, I know he played back in the day, but his speed, size, power, his tenacity, his anger. Yep. And then Ray Lewis is just one of the greatest football players I've ever seen play. But LT, many will say, outside of Tom Brady, when you talk of GOATs, it's Tom Brady, it's Jerry Rice, and it's Lawrence Taylor. Lawrence Taylor's the greatest defensive player of all time.
Yeah, I really feel privileged this time around. Sometimes we do some of these Mount Rushmores, and I'm just going off of hearsay from what my grandfather, rest his soul, and some of my uncles and my dad and everybody else told me of how great some player was. 3 out of these 4, George, I watched with thine eyes. Lawrence Taylor, I was a young buck, but I at least got to see him. Ray Lewis, I covered, as you know, in Baltimore. It was an amazing opportunity to cover both him and Ed Reed at the same time. It was crazy. Derek Thomas, the late, great Derek Thomas, rest his soul. And then Dick Butkus, I did not see. However, we all know, and you described it there perfectly, how dominant he was and what he means to the game of football. However, for this exercise, I will gladly take Dick Butkus' name off of the list since I didn't see him and just give you some honorable mentions, even though I don't have a problem with him being on here, obviously. Mike Singletary, same damn franchise, same position. Yep. I saw him when I was young. He was my favorite player outside of Jerry Rice when I was young, and he was just menacing. Absolutely. There's probably no Ray Lewis. Patrick Willis is another one who comes to mind. Guys who could cover the field with that intensity, sideline to sideline, tackle machines. There's none of them without Mike Singletary. And he had them big old crazy eyes. I used to love that. Patrick Willis, I mentioned, honorable mention. Luke Kuechly, who everyone knows around here locally. You know, I mean, again, Kuechly and Patrick Willis, both you have to kind of discount because they didn't play long enough. But that was a choice that they made, right? Like Andrew Luck, where it's like, look, I've had enough. But, man, I tell you what, even though it was lightning in a bottle and they didn't have the longevity, both of those guys, and Patrick Willis and Luke Kuechly, if they had played longer, George, there's no doubt in my mind one of them, if not both, would have ended up on this Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, I think it was Patrick Willis's feet that caused him just a bunch of injuries and couldn't get healthy with his feet, caused him to be to finish playing early. Luke Kuechly was concussions. I'd put if Luke Kuechly played a full long career at the level he was, I think he would have went down as the best middle linebacker in NFL history. Yep. I put Junior Seau and Brian Urlacher on my honorable mention list as well. Yep. But I like that Singletary stick out because he's on mine. Defensive Player of the Year in 1985. Okay, so you were the best player on the best defense ever, and he was also 7-time first-team All-Pro. The only defensive player with more All-Pro nods was Lawrence Taylor. So I think that speaks for all you need to know about Mike Singletary. But also to Derek Thomas, I think over 125 career sacks, and he's playing in the 90s for the Chiefs. If you put together a Kansas City or if you put together a Chiefs Mount Rushmore, it's Mahomes, it's Kelsey now. It would maybe be Tony Gonzalez if I say leave him off because he disrespected the city. Sure. But after Mahomes and Kelsey, it's Derek Thomas. Or you could say 1 is Mahomes, 2 is Derek Thomas. That's how good of a linebacker he was. Now, I'm not going to say because you're the franchise's best, you'd be one of the best of all time. But he was that good that if it wasn't for Patrick Mahomes, he'd be the best in KC Chiefs history. But what he did at the position, again, as a sack artist and an overall linebacker, he was so good. You want to talk defensive line? Let's get into the NESN defensive line. Mount Rushmore. We asked NESN.com writers, on-air talent producers to vote for greatest defensive linemen of all time. Lista came up with Reggie White, Aaron Donald, Bruce Smith, and Joe Green. Hard to dispute this list. I know there's some guys that were left off. I love Aaron Donald's on it. What do you think of this top 4?
I watched 3 out of 4. I did not watch Joe Green, but I know everyone loved Mean Joe Green. I thought I would swap him out personally for either Dwight Freeney, who was an absolute freak, or John Randall, who was an absolute freak. I think either one of those dudes should be on this list, if not both. But I'm not taking Reggie White off. I'm not taking Aaron Donald, certainly not taking Bruce Smith off. I would start with Joe Green personally. I would take Joe Green off and replace him with Dwight Freeney or John Randall. I don't have a problem with either one of those two for Joe Green's spot. But again, I kind of am disqualified too because I didn't watch Joe Green. The most I know about Joe Green is that stupid commercial that they show every year when they talk about the best Super Bowl commercials. And it's Mean Joe Green in his locker room, and everyone's scared because he's so scary. No one wants to talk to him. And then some little, piddly kid walks up, and he's like, "Will you take my towel for me?" And he's like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh, Joe Green has a heart." That's all I know. I mean, I don't know anything about this guy. Dwight Freeney, John Randall. Either or both belong on this list as far as I'm concerned.
Dwight Freeney, 26th all-time unofficially in sacks with 125.5. Officially, he's top 20, though. So that's 18. I have the Pro Football Reference in front of me. That Dwight Freeney one, I like that. I mean, we watched him of our era. That spin move, which is diabolical. Patriots fans know all about that. I like this top four. Reggie White, swim move, bull rush, forearm shiver, 198 sacks, second all-time. To Bruce Smith, who's all-time sack leader. And Bruce Smith played in a 3-4 defense, which wasn't nice to defensive ends to put up big numbers. He had 13 double-digit sack seasons. And Aaron Donald as well, pound for pound, greatest defensive lineman of all time, in my opinion. 3-time DPOY in modern-day football, getting double and triple teamed all the time. Won a Super Bowl, 8-time All-Pro. And he's one of 3 defensive tackles in the 100-sack club. The one I would go with, I was looking, J.J. Watt could have been on balance. 114.5 career sacks, 3 Defensive Player of the Years in 4 years. One of those when he won, Justin Houston had 22 sacks for the Chiefs, and J.J. Watt was still unanimous. He was great on run defense. You run to the right side or his side, it was going nowhere. I mean, just an all-around player for the Houston Texans, and even had good years for the Cardinals. And then the other one, I would think Deacon Jones, but I just think because I know of his signature head slap move that was outlawed by the NFL, but he had literally hit an offensive lineman on the head to kind of stun them and get around. 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, 8-time All-Pro, unofficially 173.5 sacks, and had 20-plus sacks every season from 64 to 68. That's 5 straight years. That's why I think of Deacon Jones. I never saw him play, so I would think, all right, let's get J.J. Watt onto this list. But this top 4, it's tough to disagree with anyone on this.
Dog, I don't even think J.J. is the best Watt. I think T.J. I'll be honest with you. I think when the smoke clears, I think T.J. Watt could be better.
Look, the sack record is so impressive, but I just think J.J. Watt, how dominant he was, and he was propping up a really bad Texans defense all those years. Yeah, T.J. needs more years of playing at this level, but I would take J.J. Watt over T.J. Watt. T.J. Watt's more of a pure pass rusher, though, more of an edge rusher. I think J.J. Watt with his all-around game is why I like him over T.J. But also T.J.'s book's not done being written, and he's certainly the top 3 defensive end in the NFL right now.
Yeah, there's guys in the league right now, including T.J. Watt, that could end up on this list, when it's all said and done, when it's all over. I mean, obviously, T.J. Watt, we talk about. I think the Bosa boys are special. They just had to stay healthy. They seem to both kind of get nicked up a lot. I like Aiden Hutchinson in Detroit. I think there's a lot of really stellar, young, pass-rushing monsters right now in this league. I've been seeing a lot of clips. I'm not bringing them up for Mount Rushmore, but just because I want to be right, I'm going to bring them up here, George. I've been seeing Jared Verse doing a lot of big things there in L.A. I keep telling you, I told you on draft night, that guy's going to be special too. I know we're talking about Aaron Donald here, but I think there's a lot of young, tremendous, dynamic pass rushers and defensive linemen in this league right now that could end up on a Mount Rushmore one day.
I wonder how many kids growing up broke their hands or broke a finger trying to do the head slap move from Deacon Jones. Obviously, I was never a defensive end, so I never tried that. But just seeing footage of those plays, of that move, is just the funniest thing in the world. The NFL is like, all right, we got to put an end to this. Can't be hitting people in the head. No hands to the face.
We're talking about hands. I'm not even trying to be funny. Your boy from the Giants, if that 4th of July accident never happens, he was on his way too. He was never really the same player after that.
Jason Pierre-Paul, yeah. Awesome defensive end. So dominant for the G-men. And the string that they had of the guys there. It was the Justin Tucks. It was Osi Umenyoras. And then it was Jason Pierre-Paul getting in. Obviously, Michael Strahan established it all.
one after the next. Shoot, man, look at them now. Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence. At least they know how to draft defensive linemen.
All right, let's get into our Mount Rushmore, as we've been doing. We have our Nesson Safeties Mount Rushmore. So we've pulled Nesson.com writers like Sean McGuire and Keegan Stiefel, Nesson on-air talent like myself, and Nesson producers to vote on the 4 greatest safeties of all time. The ballot said Ed Reed, Ronnie Lott, Brian Dawkins, Troy Polamalu. What did you think of this?
I think this looks pretty similar to what I said. And I've heard Travis the last few times that you guys have talked about these kind of say that he doesn't want to vote for, or he doesn't want to mention players that are, 50 years ago sort of thing. And I kind of feel like I'm the same way. So like when I think about safeties, I think about Ed Reed and I think about Brian Dawkins. Just skull crushers and just absolute maniacs that I remember, wearing the dark masks and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, those are like the 2 that just stick out to me when you say all-time safeties.
Yeah, Ed Reed was first on my ballot. I think he's the greatest free safety of all time. He was a great center fielder. Bill Belichick would talk about him of the smartest football player and the toughest player he has to scout against. Like, there's that famous clip. It's him and Tom Brady sitting in Belichick's office, poring over Ed Reed film and just being baffled at what he does on the field. The reads, the IQ, everything. And that's a guy in 15 postseason games, 9 interceptions. His 61 interceptions from 2002 to 2012 led the NFL in that span. He was a best center fielder, and he'd be a playmaker. He would go in on punt returns and take it to the house. He'd get pick sixes and take them back as well. I did put Ronnie Lott on my ballot, though, because I think it's amazing that him and Lawrence Taylor were in the same draft. Lott went after Taylor. Ronnie Lott played cornerback on both sides, free and strong safety. In 20 postseason games, 9 interceptions as well. And just a Hall of Famer on one of the best defenses, and just a guy that would smash skulls, drop back into coverage as a free safety, just did it all for a defense. I think his versatility. Brian Dawkins, I loved. I mean, Weapon X, he was just so sick for the Eagles all those years. And Troy Polamalu, as I said, Ed Reed is the greatest free safety of all time. I think Troy Polamalu is the second greatest strong safety of all time, right behind Ronnie Lott. We're lucky, man. Like, we grew up watching 3 Hall of Fame safeties, who a lot of people would say were the 3 greatest safeties of all time, Ronnie Lott being the 4th. And even think of someone like John Lynch. I mean, a great player for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, one of the best of all time, and then was a stud when he was with the Broncos too. The safety talk's fun because you could talk about it now, but like the amount that those guys have to do, and you look at the greats now in today's game, but just it's Dawkins, it's Polamalu, it's Ed Reed. Those are the people that some players get comps to, and that's what you want to be compared to if you want to be an elite safety in the NFL, you know?
Mm-hmm. It is kind of not to bring down the vibes too much, but if like Sean Taylor, if he had played more than 4 years, like that would have been who knows?
Good. He was on track for that. Like he is spoken about like one of the best safeties of all time. It's terrible what happened to him. And I mean, it shocked the NFL world, but he was known as being so talented, rocking that 21 for Washington back in the day. Old school, like taped up the fingers, no gloves too, just such a hard hitter. Yeah, it was just 4 seasons. These are guys that did it for so long. But I agree. I mean, I'm just even thinking of, I'm not sure how many times he was All-Pro, but Polamalu 4-time. Brian Dawkins, 5-time All-Pro. Ed Reed, Defensive Player of the Year 1 year, 6-time All-Pro. I wouldn't doubt it if Sean Taylor was on that track as well.
Yeah.
That's a good call. Deep cut. Didn't even think about that. The late, great Sean Taylor.
All right. And of course, the vibes.
No, he didn't bring down the vibes. I mean, we talk about him in high regard. I think he should always be spoken about. And you got to look out for the Seans out there. You always got to rep for the Seans and put them on.
And he spelled it the right way.
I loved it. All right, let's get into our Nesson Mount Rushmore. We got cornerbacks. I'm going to do this one different, Trav. Give me your cornerback Mount Rushmore.
Oh, Dion, Darrelle Revis.
Cool.
Champ Bailey. Rod Woodson.
Woohoo! We got the same 4.
I mean, that's a right 4. That's why.
Darrelle Revis, 2009, is arguably the most dominant season I've seen from any athlete in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Andre Johnson, Randy Moss twice, Marquise Colston, Terrell Owens twice, Torrey Holt, Steve Smith, Reggie Wayne, all held under 35 yards. Chad Johnson, down. 0 catches in the regular season, then shut him down the following week.
Yep.
Would run routes for the receivers, insane IQ. Champ Bailey, I'm going to go off this one quote, Trav.
Steve Smith said this about Champ Bailey. If I lined up in the slot, he lined up in the slot. If I lined up at running back, he would line up as linebacker. If I parked my car in the parking lot, he was the parking attendant. Champ Bailey lined up everywhere. That just says it about him, bro.
Yep. They don't make them like that anymore. Now guys are system, just like we talk about these quarterbacks, they're system defensive backs too. Rod Woodson's another one, man, like in his prime, absolute dog. And then as he got older, you know, he came over to Baltimore. They moved him to safety, and he was still an absolute animal. All these guys can play. You know, where I grew up, Darrell Green would have been on this list, but Darrell Green was undersized. These guys are all big dudes too. Darrell Green, you know, I got to knock him a little bit because of the size there, even though he played bigger. I would also say Charles Woodson is on my honorable mention as well. Absolute shutdown corner, and then moved to safety late in his career as well. I'd probably have him at number 5, to be honest with you, George, Charles Woodson. But these 4, we have Deion Darrell, Revis, Rod Woodson, and Champ Bailey. It's the correct answer. That's it. For this position, that's who it is.
Rod Woodson, he would always lay the wood, can hit like a mother effer, 3rd all-time in interceptions. I mean, he was great for the Steelers. And then primetime, man, he would bait quarterbacks into throws where they're like, he shouldn't be there. Like there's his closing speed, his athleticism, and what he would do with the ball in his hands too, man. Punt returns or on pick sixes. So then here's the Mount Rushmore from Nesson. We asked Nesson.com writers, on-air talent producers to vote on the 4 greatest cornerbacks of all time. Deion Sanders, Darrelle Revis, Rod Woodson, Champ Bailey. I didn't know the top 4.
It
was in my notes, but I put mine. Yeah. Look at that. Unanimous. We can say it now. The unanimous cornerback Mount Rushmore is Darrelle Revis, Champ Bailey, Rod Woodson, and primetime Deion Sanders.
Hey, congrats, everyone. We all know ball. All of us. Let's go, baby.
Thanks so much for making us a part of your day. Thank you so much for you guys just sticking with us all throughout the year. That was a fun conversation we had. And hey, wherever you get your podcast, make sure to check out all of Nesson's podcasts. Boston has entered the chat, Foxboro Rush, Hold My Banner, 310 to Left, Respect Her Game, The Hockey Hub, and we got plenty more as well. That's wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Amazon Prime, and YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button as well. I'm George Bilecki. He's Travis Thomas. We'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everyone.